In the heart of a blizzard, a little girl sits alone on a frozen park bench. No coat, no hat, just a threadbare blue bag clutched to her chest like it holds the last piece of her soul. The snow piles high around her boots, her lips are cracked. She doesn't cry, not anymore. She was told someone might come, but not to hope. Hope is dangerous. Hope gets you hurt. Most would never see her in time, but one German shepherd, trained for war, now a companion to a broken soldier, refuses to keep walking. He stops, he stares, and then he growls. That single sound will change everything. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Comment your country below. Let's see how far a single act of courage can travel. The wind was merciless, gnashing its frozen teeth through the narrow streets of Frostford, tearing down branches, slamming shutters, and hurling snow across empty sidewalks. Streetlights flickered like dying embers in the white chaos, casting broken halos in the storm. It wasn't a night meant for saving anyone. It was a night meant for forgetting. Eli Turner pulled his scarf tighter around his jaw, the wool already stiff with frost. His breath fogged in thick bursts as he stepped off the porch of the worn-down duplex he called home, half a structure on the edge of a town that had long stopped asking where he came from. He didn't mind. Quiet was better. Quiet was safer. At 45, Eli moved with the slow control of a man who no longer trusted the ground beneath him. His build was solid, the kind that came from decades of combat readiness. Broad chest, squared shoulders, and arms thick with old discipline. His face, angular and unshaven, was tired but sharp, not marked by any visible scars, but by something quieter, an emptiness behind the pale gray of his eyes. He looked like a man who once roared and now only breathed. Beside him padded his only consistent companion, Bruno. Bruno was a 6-year-old German shepherd, a retired military K9, with a lean frame, powerful haunches, and a coat of thick sable and black. His left ear folded slightly at the top, giving him a lopsided nobility. He didn't bark unless he had to, didn't wag his tail at strangers. But when he looked at Eli, it wasn't with obedience, it was understanding. The kind that came from crawling through smoke and blood together, from surviving when others hadn't. Eli called it a walk, but really, it was habit. Nightly treks through the town's edge to keep the ghosts from settling in. Some guys drank. Some screamed in their sleep. Eli walked with his dog. The snow piled higher by the minute as they crossed Maple Street and entered the town park, now buried in white. The fountain at the center was just a lump of ice. The benches were barely outlines under the drift. The swings creaked uselessly in the wind. No footsteps, no sled tracks. Just the sound of boots crunching and Bruno's breath. Steady, calm. Until he stopped. Bruno froze mid-step, his ears suddenly erect, tail stiff. A low growl rumbled in his throat, deep and tense like something ancient had stirred. Eli slowed. "What is it?" Then Bruno barked once, sharp, clipped, a warning. He bolted through the snow toward the edge of the square. Eli followed instinctively, adrenaline surging. His boots punched through knee-deep drifts as they veered toward a bench nearly buried in snow. Then he saw it. A shape. No, two. One was barely a silhouette, small, hunched, shaking. The other, lifeless. As Eli rushed closer, the shape became a little girl. 4, maybe 5 years old. Her arms were wrapped around something, and her face was flushed red from cold, lips cracked, hair plastered to her forehead with half-frozen sweat. She wore a torn pink dress, far too thin for the weather, and no jacket. Her legs dangled off the bench like an abandoned doll. In her lap, she clutched a blue canvas bag, held to her chest like it contained her very breath. "God," Eli whispered, dropping to one knee. He reached out gently. "Hey, you okay?" The girl flinched, but didn't pull away. Her eyes fluttered open, blue, wide, glazed with exhaustion. "Don't let them take my bag," she whispered. Then her head lolled forward. Eli caught her before she fell. Her skin was cold, soaked in the kind of frost that turned limbs gray and memories distant. He peeled off his coat and wrapped it tightly around her, tucking the blue bag inside with her. She didn't resist, just curled instinctively against his chest, hands still locked on the straps. Bruno circled once, and then pressed against Eli's thigh, as if shielding them both from the wind. Eli looked around. No footprints other than theirs. No adult nearby. The second shape he'd seen was just an abandoned heap of snow-covered trash. She'd been alone. He tapped the emergency beacon on his belt. No signal in the storm. Static only. Town's clinic was 6 blocks away. The ER, 8. No time to wait. The wind shrieked behind him as he scooped the girl into his arms and rose. She was featherlight, maybe 30 pounds. Her fingers, stiff and blue, still gripped the bag inside his coat. Eli turned to the faint glow of Frostford's main road beyond the trees. "Let's move," he muttered to Bruno. The dog bolted ahead, breaking a path through the snow. Eli ran. The cold stabbed his lungs, each breath like fire. The snow clawed at his boots, yanked at his legs. But he didn't stop. He focused on the weight in his arms, the fragile heartbeat pressed against his chest, the haunting silence that had no business settling over a child. Behind him, the bench disappeared in the storm. Ahead, the lights of the town grew closer, flickering like hope that hadn't quite gone out. And somewhere deep in his chest, Eli felt something shift, something long buried. Not guilt, not grief, purpose. The walls of Frostford General were the color of cold oatmeal, muted, tired, forgettable. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead like bored cicadas as snow tapped against the windows in steady rhythms. Outside, the blizzard was finally weakening, but inside, a different kind of storm churned quietly behind a locked door on the 3rd floor of the pediatric wing. Lila Quinn lay curled on the hospital bed, her small body wrapped in too many layers for someone so tiny. Her cheeks were still flushed from exposure, but she was breathing steadily now. The pink dress had been replaced by a child-sized hospital gown, printed with faded bears that had long since lost their cheer. Her hair, dark and tangled, was damp around her temples. Nurses had cleaned her up, but none had managed to pry the blue canvas bag from her grasp. It was clutched to her chest like a shield. One hand curled around its strap, the other around the bag's fabric edge. A nurse had tried earlier to take it for inventory. Lila had let out a scream so sharp it echoed through the corridor. Since then, everyone had learned to give her space. Bruno was lying by the foot of the bed, eyes half-lidded but alert. He hadn't left her side since they arrived. The staff didn't argue. After all, it wasn't the first time a dog had understood something long before the humans did. Eli sat in a corner chair, arms crossed, legs outstretched, gaze fixed on the girl. He hadn't spoken much since they'd arrived 4 hours ago. Just filled out intake forms, gave a rough report of what he saw, and told the nurse his name. When they asked about the girl's identity, he only shook his head. He didn't know. Not yet. The door opened gently, and a tall woman stepped inside, clipboard in hand. She was in her early 40s, with dark skin and short curly hair that framed her face like a crown of charcoal. Her name tag read, Dr. Marissa Lake, Pediatrics. She moved with the grace of someone who knew both how to command attention and offer comfort. "She's stable," Dr. Lake said softly. "No frostbite, thankfully. Some early hypothermic damage, but nothing permanent. She'll need rest, and someone familiar. That's you for now." "I'm not family," Eli replied. Dr. Lake glanced at Bruno, then at the way Lila's grip tightened around the bag, even in sleep. "She doesn't seem to care." Eli said nothing. "She might not talk for a while," the doctor added. "Not out loud, anyway." Eli finally looked away from Lila. "There a social worker assigned?" "She's on her way, but with the storm and the holidays, might be tomorrow." Dr. Lake paused. "You look like you haven't slept in days." "I don't," Eli replied flatly. Dr. Lake smiled faintly, then turned to adjust Lila's IV. "If you want to be useful, help us figure out who she is. She didn't have any ID. That bag is all she brought in. You think she'll let you look inside?" Eli shook his head. "Not yet." "Then stay close. Let her show you when she's ready." Dr. Lake exited, and the silence settled again. It was nearly dawn when the girl stirred. Lila sat up slowly, blinking under the soft overhead light. Her first motion wasn't to speak, or even cry. It was to check the bag. Once satisfied it was still there, she finally looked around. When her eyes found Eli, she tensed. He raised his hand slowly. "Hey, you're safe." She didn't answer. Bruno sat up and padded gently toward the bed, placing his head near her knee. Lila blinked at him, then slowly reached out and touched his fur with tentative fingers. Eli watched as the little girl leaned forward and, after a long hesitation, whispered something into the dog's ear. Bruno wagged his tail, once, and settled in. Eli exhaled, unsure why that moment felt more real than anything else had in weeks. He stood and crossed the room slowly. "Can I sit?" Lila didn't answer, but didn't shake her head either. Eli took it as permission and sat beside her bed. "What's your name?" he asked. Her eyes flicked toward the door, then back to the bag. No reply. "Mine's Eli, that's Bruno." She looked down, fiddling with the bag strap. He tried again. "You were brave, out there. Most adults wouldn't have lasted the night." Still no answer. Then, without warning, she opened the bag. Not all the way, just enough for her small hand to disappear inside. She pulled out a battered teddy bear, faded brown with one eye missing and a seam across its belly. She hugged it silently. Then, carefully, she reached again and handed Eli a small, water-damaged notebook. It was spiral-bound, edges curled, cover peeling. Inside were drawings, scribbled pictures of a girl, a woman, a house, something that looked like a van. And in the back pocket, a folded letter. Eli opened it carefully. It wasn't addressed, just written in a child's messy print, though clearly dictated. "Dear lady, my mom said if something happens and I'm alone, to give this to someone kind. We had to leave our last place. She said don't trust uniforms, but Bruno isn't scary and you don't smell like bad. My name is Lila. I'm 4.5. Please don't throw my bag away. It has my whole life inside." Eli swallowed hard and folded the letter back. He didn't speak, just nodded once and handed the notebook back. She returned it to the bag like it was treasure. The door creaked again. This time, it was someone Eli didn't expect. A man in his 50s entered the room without knocking, tall and wiry, with silver-streaked hair, a faded bomber jacket, and boots still wet from snow. His face was lean and carved from years of fatigue, but his eyes, bright hazel, lit up with surprise. "Still bad at sleeping, huh?" he said, grinning. Eli's eyebrows lifted. "Dr. Ethan Ward?" The man nodded. "Psychiatry. They pulled me in for intake consult. Didn't realize I'd run into an old ghost." Eli stood and shook his hand. "Last I heard, you went private." Ward smirked. "Well, Frostford's not exactly flooded with shrinks. I volunteer a few days a month." His gaze shifted to Lila. "She yours?" Eli shook his head. "Just found her." Ward nodded. "She looks like someone who stopped believing in help." Eli sighed. "I know the type." Ward lowered his voice. "So do you still believe you're not meant to help anymore?" Eli didn't answer. Ward softened. "Sometimes, it's not about saving everyone, just one, and letting that be enough." Bruno let out a soft huff. Lila was asleep again, arms around the bag, face finally at peace. Eli looked at her, then back at his old friend. "Maybe one is enough," he said quietly. The snow had quieted overnight, settling like dust on a forgotten world. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind brittle ice and skies the color of wet slate. Frostford awoke slowly, its streets blinking in the pale light of a frozen dawn. For Eli Turner, the silence wasn't comforting. It felt like a curtain drawn too tightly, like something had hidden itself beneath the surface. He stood once more at the park's edge, bundled in his worn field jacket, a knit beanie pulled low over his brow. Bruno trotted beside him, tail swaying, nose low to the ground. The park bench where they had found Lila was now just a memory, its snow-covered outline already reshaped by drifting wind. But Bruno remembered. The dog paused, sniffing the air with sharp, deliberate motions, then let out a soft huff. He turned off the path, ears perked, tail stiffening. Eli followed without a word. He'd learned to trust the dog's instincts more than his own. Bruno moved like a ghost through the whiteness, weaving between skeletal trees and half-buried swings. Near the far edge of the park, where the forest began again, Bruno stopped. There, half frozen in the snow, was a patch of disturbed ice. Not footprints exactly, but something heavier. Flattened snow in an oval shape, slightly sunken, as if something had been dragged or crouched there. Eli crouched beside it, brushing off the top layer of frost. Underneath, he saw a boot print, small. Not a child's, but not large enough to be his either. The sole pattern was distinct, a narrow zigzag worn in the center. He took out his phone, snapped a photo, and moved on. Bruno circled again, picking up another scent. His ears flattened as he moved toward a snowbank, then barked once, sharp and guttural. Eli rushed over. There, nestled under a cluster of evergreens, was an old car. An abandoned sedan, white, mostly buried in snow. The license plate was frosted over. One of the back windows was cracked. A child's blanket, pink, torn, and stained, hung halfway out the door. Eli pulled his gloves tighter and approached. He scraped the frost from the back window, squinting through the foggy glass. Inside, a child's booster seat, snapped and broken. On the floor lay a plastic juice bottle, half frozen. A single child's sneaker sat beneath the passenger seat. His stomach turned. He opened the driver's side door. It creaked with protest. The interior smelled of mildew and plastic. The glove box hung open. Papers had been hastily torn through, some still stuffed in odd places. Daycare forms, fake IDs, a flyer for a women's shelter in Billings with Hannah Lake's name printed in faded ink. Eli stared at it. Hannah Lake. The name tugged something loose from the back of his memory. A missing persons report, 3 years ago. A young woman, at 27, brown hair. Filed a complaint about harassment from a man claiming to work for Child Protective Services. She vanished 2 days later. The case went cold. Eli grabbed the flyer, folded it carefully, and backed out of the vehicle. Bruno stood at attention near the tree line. "Let's go," Eli said. "I need to talk to someone." They returned to the hospital an hour later, windburned and quiet. Eli bypassed the main desk and made his way up to the 3rd floor. Lila was sleeping again, curled on her side with the blue bag pressed tightly against her stomach. Bruno sat beside her bed as if nothing had changed. Downstairs, the cafeteria was nearly empty except for 2 staffers and a woman sitting alone at the corner table with a steaming cup of tea. She wore a forest green sweater, dark jeans, and her curly blonde hair was tied back into a neat low bun. She had an elegant stillness about her, like someone who thought carefully before speaking, and even more carefully before trusting. Nora Lynn, the hospital's social worker, was in her early 30s. Petite but sharp-eyed, with porcelain skin and a gaze that could sift through half-truths in seconds. She had been assigned to Lila's case and had already begun compiling notes from nursing staff. "You look like you've been digging graves," she said as Eli slid into the seat across from her. "Something like that?" Nora raised an eyebrow. "Find anything?" He handed her the flyer. She took it, read slowly, her lips tightening. "Hannah Lake. I've seen this name. She applied for placement at a shelter in Bozeman. Never showed up. I found this in an abandoned car, same area where Lila was discovered. There was a child's seat, toys, food wrappers, all frozen." Nora folded the paper. "You think Lila's connected?" "I think she may be the only one who got away." Nora sat back, her features shadowed. "We've heard rumors. Someone pretending to be CPS, offering rides, help, emergency housing. They target women with kids, people on the edge of systems. I served in places where you learn to spot patterns like this. It fits." She nodded, fingers tapping against the paper cup. "So what now?" Eli leaned in. "I want to see if Lila knows the name Hannah, or if she recognizes a face. But I'll wait. She needs time." "Do it gently. She's fragile." "More than fragile," Eli said. "She's a survivor." They sat in silence for a while. Then Nora pulled out her phone and scrolled through records. "I'll dig deeper," she said. "Cross-reference missing women with child reports in the last 4 years. I'll keep it quiet." Eli stood. "I'm going to sit with her a while." Back upstairs, Bruno raised his head as Eli entered. Lila was awake now, staring at the ceiling, fingers toying with the edge of the bag. She looked at him as he approached but said nothing. He sat beside her bed. "I went back to the park," he said softly. "Found a car. Some papers. One of them had a name." She shifted slightly. "I want to show you something, only if you want." He pulled the flyer from his pocket and unfolded it. "Do you know her?" he asked, placing it on the blanket. Lila looked at the photo. Her lip trembled. Then she nodded, once. "That's Mama's friend," she whispered. Eli swallowed hard. "Do you know where she is?" Lila's eyes filled with tears. "She didn't get out." She curled into herself again, pressing the bag tighter. Bruno moved forward and rested his head gently against her side. Eli reached out and squeezed her hand. "We'll find out what happened," he said quietly. "I promise." The snow outside the duplex had softened under the pale morning light, turning from jagged ice into a deceptive slush. Frostford had returned to its uneasy stillness, the kind of quiet that only came after something important had been buried. Eli Turner stood in the kitchen, pouring black coffee into a chipped ceramic mug. His thoughts were elsewhere, stuck on the folded flyer in his jacket pocket, and the voice of a little girl saying, "She didn't get out." Upstairs, Lila was still sleeping, curled against Bruno like the dog was a furnace and a guardian all at once. Bruno had refused to leave her since their return. He now slept lightly, ear twitching every time her breathing changed. Eli rubbed his temple and stared out the frosted window. Something didn't feel right. Not the kind of dread that came from memory, but the quiet tension of something approaching. A knock at the door. Sharp. Calculated. Bruno was on his feet instantly. No bark. Just a low growl. Eli stepped into the hallway, nodded once at Bruno, and approached the door. He opened it halfway, the security chain still latched. Standing outside was a man in a navy parka with government patches on the shoulders, a thin briefcase tucked under one arm. His hair was short and sandy blonde, neatly combed, face clean-shaven with an unnatural stillness in his jaw. His smile was tight, professionally polite, and entirely unconvincing. "Good morning," the man said. "Sorry to drop in unannounced. I'm with State Child Services. We received a referral for a minor, Lila Quinn. I'd like to speak with her guardian." Eli didn't move. "You got ID?" The man reached into his coat pocket and produced a leather wallet. Inside was a badge. It looked real at first glance, but the seal was off-center. The nameplate read, "James Alton." A title beneath, "Protective Field Agent." Bruno stepped closer to the door, ears flat, lips curled slightly. "She's not ready to speak to anyone," Eli said flatly. "She just got out of a hospital bed." Alton's smile didn't waver. "Understood. I won't disturb her. Just need a quick verification. Paperwork, chain of custody. These things get messy otherwise." Eli narrowed his eyes. "You got a court order?" Alton hesitated, then gave a small shrug. "Not yet. But I've worked with your local social worker, Nora Lynn, right? She can verify everything." "I'll call her myself," Eli replied. As he began to shut the door, Alton raised his voice slightly. "Just be careful, Mr. Turner. Obstructing child placement is a felony, even for ex-military." Bruno growled louder, a low, threatening rumble. Eli let the silence speak. Then, slowly, he shut the door. He waited behind the wood until he heard retreating footsteps. Bruno stared at the door until the tension eased. Eli moved quickly to the coat rack and pulled down the file folder he'd kept since returning from the park. He placed it on the table, flipped it open. Missing persons reports, photographs, old Army field logs. In the bottom corner was a worn personnel folder. Once confidential, now his only leverage. He flipped to a photo. A younger version of the man who just stood at his doorstep. Slightly more weight in the face. Same smug smile. Bradley Hale, not Alton, not CPS. Bradley Hale had been dishonorably discharged from the Army 7 years ago. Eli hadn't served with him directly, but had heard about the man, dishonesty, psychological manipulation, and eventually involvement in a civilian abuse case that never stuck. Since then, Hale had been tied, informally, to 3 missing children's cases across state lines. No charges, no convictions, no witnesses, until now. Eli clenched his jaw. The man wasn't just hunting. He was organized, dressed in state uniforms, carrying forged ID, targeting children like Lila, those who wouldn't be believed, who had no one. Upstairs, Lila stirred. Bruno padded quietly back to her bedside. Eli took the wet notebook from the shelf, the one Lila had guarded so fiercely. He hadn't opened it fully yet. The pages were still drying near the heater. One page was looser than the rest, folded over several times, and tucked into the back sleeve. Eli opened it carefully. Inside was a crinkled piece of foil with a recording chip embedded in it, like a child's toy or a cheap greeting card mechanism. There was a small play button scratched onto it with a ballpoint pen. He pressed it. At first, static. Then a woman's voice, soft, shaky, but unmistakably maternal. "If you're hearing this, it means Lila made it out. My name is Sarah Quinn. I'm her mother. I don't know where she'll end up, but please, whoever you are, protect her. We were running. He wasn't who he said he was. I think he's still looking for us. Please don't let them take her. Please don't trust the uniforms." The message ended in a crackling silence. Eli sat back, eyes closed for a moment. Sarah Quinn. Another name, another woman left behind. He grabbed his phone and called Nora. She answered on the second ring, her voice tight. "I already know," she said. "He came to my office 30 minutes ago asking about Lila. Said you were being uncooperative. But I checked. There's no record of James Alton in any state database." "He's Bradley Hale," Eli said. "Ex-military, dirty, and he's here." "I believe you," Nora said, "but we'll need proof. Paper trails, enough for an injunction." "I'll get it," Eli promised. He hung up and turned back toward the stairs. Lila was sitting up now, holding Bruno like he was the last safe place in the world. Eli sat on the edge of her bed. "I need to ask you something," he said gently. "Do you remember a man with blonde hair? A fake badge? He said his name was Alton." Lila's face went pale. She nodded slowly. "That's the one Mama said to run from." Eli reached out and squeezed her shoulder. "You did good. You made it out." "But Mama didn't," she whispered. "I know," Eli said quietly, "but I won't let him find you. I promise." The snow crunched louder under Bruno's paws than Eli liked. It wasn't the brittle crackle of ice, but the kind of shallow compression that told him it was melting from beneath. Untrustworthy. Thin. The wind had died down overnight, but the sky above Frostford remained heavy and low, pregnant with another storm. That gave them a narrow window, and Bruno, nose to the earth, ears twitching, was determined not to waste it. They had followed the scent for nearly 30 minutes, weaving deeper into the forested outskirts of town, where no one had reason to go unless they were hiding. Or hiding something. The trees thickened, birch and pine leaning in like witnesses. Bruno stopped suddenly near a split in the trail. His body stiffened, tail low but rigid. He turned sharply left, toward a ridge where the snow was packed unnaturally smooth, like it had been repeatedly cleared and buried again. Eli followed in silence, his breath coming in even puffs. His gloved hands curled tightly around the handle of the crowbar hidden beneath his coat. His service pistol was tucked at the base of his spine. It wasn't legal, not anymore, but after the knock on his door yesterday, he stopped caring about formalities. Bruno barked once, low and restrained, and trotted forward. At the edge of the tree line, the forest opened into a strange clearing. At first glance, it looked like a construction site abandoned mid-project. There were 3 trailers, all different makes, 2 covered in camo tarp, and 1 disguised with siding painted to look like wood. A small generator hummed faintly near the far corner, half buried under snow. No obvious cameras, no lights. But it wasn't empty. Eli crouched behind a pile of brush and scanned the scene. A man, mid-30s, wearing a puffy black jacket and a gray beanie, stepped out of one trailer, tossed something into the snow, and lit a cigarette. His face was narrow, bearded, with a twitchy sort of posture that made Eli think of amphetamines and paranoia. He carried no visible weapon, but had the look of someone who kept one close. Bruno stayed low, muscles tight. Eli waited until the man disappeared back inside, then approached the back of the nearest trailer. The door had no lock, just a latch. He popped it open with his crowbar and slipped inside. The smell hit first: mildew, old food, and the cloying scent of plastic heated by too many bodies in too small a space. It was dim, lit only by a battery-powered lantern on the floor. There were mattresses along both walls, covered in thin blankets, toys, juice boxes, clothes scattered in piles. On one of the beds, a small girl sat cross-legged, maybe 6 years old, blonde hair matted, face smudged with dirt. She stared at him with glassy eyes but didn't move. "Hey," Eli whispered. "It's okay. I'm here to help." The girl blinked but said nothing. Behind her, another figure stirred. A boy, younger, maybe 4, lying curled in a corner, pale and silent. Then came the sound of movement in the next room. A thump, a groan. Eli crept forward, opened the interior divider. A woman sat on the floor, wrists zip-tied, one eye swollen shut. She was in her late 20s, tall but gaunt, with olive-toned skin and dark curly hair that stuck to her cheekbones with sweat. Her clothes were worn and mismatched, and her lip was split. She stared up at Eli, dazed. "My name's Eli Turner," he said. "You're safe now." The woman flinched. "They'll come back soon." "No," he said. "They won't." Bruno appeared silently at the door, growled once, then moved toward the hallway, watching their six. Eli helped cut the woman's bindings, then hoisted the boy into her arms. "What's your name?" he asked. "Jasmine," she whispered, wincing. "The kids, Layla and Micah. We were supposed to be transferred. That's what they told me." Eli's jaw tightened. "Not anymore. Let's move." They exited through the back, keeping low. Bruno led them out toward the north ridge, avoiding the clearing entirely. No one saw them leave. By the time they reached the edge of the highway, the sky had darkened again. Eli called Nora Lynn and the local sheriff's department. Sheriff Howard Mace was already en route. Mace was a broad man in his 60s with skin like worn leather and a permanent squint as if the world had spent too long lying to him. He arrived in a mud-covered SUV, flanked by a deputy and 2 EMTs. His demeanor was dry and unfazed, but when he saw the kids and the bruises on Jasmine's face, something inside him stiffened. "Where's the location?" he asked Eli. "Marked it with my GPS. I'll give you coordinates." "You go in?" "Found them in the middle trailer. Left one man inside. Thin, beard, black jacket. Probably armed." Mace nodded. "You did good." Eli turned toward Jasmine and the kids as they were loaded into the ambulance. Jasmine looked back at him, clutching Micah close. "Thank you." Eli just nodded. "Get warm. We'll take it from here." Back at the duplex, the wind had picked up again. Lila was sitting on the floor beside Bruno, tracing lines in the fur along his side. She had changed into a clean sweater Nora had brought, light gray with a faded unicorn stitched across the chest. Her hair had been brushed into soft waves. For the first time since she arrived, she looked like a child. "Where'd you go?" she asked as Eli entered. "Just checked on something." She tilted her head. "You found someone, didn't you?" Eli sat beside her. "Yeah, a mom and 2 kids, like you." Lila was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned forward and wrapped her arms around Bruno's neck, burying her face in his side. "You're my brother now," she mumbled. "You keep me safe." Bruno licked her hand once, then rested his head across her legs. The courthouse in Frostford was a squat, aging building of red brick and stooped windows, stoic as the town itself. Snow still lined the sidewalks despite days of weak winter sun, and the flag above the doorway rippled with lazy defiance. Inside, the air was stiff with expectation and the scent of fresh brewed coffee from the nearby break room. People moved with caution, their boots wet with slush, their voices low, aware that something rare was about to unfold, a trial that might actually change something. Eli stood outside the courtroom, dressed in the same navy coat he'd worn since the rescue, its collar lined with pale wolf-gray fur. His dark blonde hair was combed back, and the bags beneath his eyes had faded just slightly. Beside him, Bruno sat alert, his 5-year-old frame still as a statue. The German Shepherd wore a new navy blue vest with a white patch that read, "Emotional support approved by court order." It had taken Nora Lynn, the hospital psychologist, 3 long letters and 1 in-person plea to get it approved. But now, looking at Lila seated nearby, it was already worth it. Lila wore a simple navy blue dress with a thick woolen cardigan. Her hair was pinned back with a silver clip shaped like a star, her cheeks pale but calm. In her lap was the faded green bag, zipped and clenched tightly. Her fingers fidgeted, but her eyes were steady, until the bailiff called her name. The courtroom was quiet when she entered, escorted by Eli and Bruno. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s named Catherine Moore, offered a kind nod. She was tall and composed, with iron-gray hair twisted into a tight bun, glasses perched at the tip of a long, freckled nose. A woman known for never wasting a word. The judge, Samuel Blythe, a broad-shouldered man in his 60s with steel-gray eyes and deep creases at the corners of his mouth, presided with a sort of weary patience, his tolerance for drama low, but his reverence for justice unwavering. On the other side of the courtroom sat Bradley Hale, pale, expressionless, his hands cuffed at the waist. Clean-shaven, in a plain gray suit, but nothing could soften the edge in his stare, cold, flat, like ice under oil. He didn't look at Lila. He looked only at the judge, as if she didn't exist. Lila climbed into the witness stand with help from the bailiff. Her legs dangled from the seat, not quite reaching the floor. The judge leaned in slightly. Lila, can you tell us who brought you to the bench in the park that night? Her voice was a breath. I don't remember. Catherine Moore smiled gently. That's okay, sweetheart. Can you tell us what happened before that? Lila clutched her bag tighter. Mama told me to hide. She said to stay quiet until the man left. Catherine nodded. Do you remember the man? Lila blinked slowly. He had gloves. He said my name, but Mama said not to go with him. Was this man in the room today? Lila's shoulders tensed. Her eyes flicked once toward Bradley and dropped immediately. She shook her head. The courtroom was silent. Judge Blythe glanced at Catherine, who gave a slight nod and said, No further questions for now, Your Honor. As Lila stepped down from the stand, the tension in the room hung heavy. Eli crouched beside her, offering no words, just his hand. She gripped it tightly. Bruno trotted ahead of them as they walked back to the spectators' bench, but before she sat, Lila suddenly paused, turned back, and looked directly at the judge. Can Bruno come with me? She asked. The judge blinked. To the stand? She nodded. Catherine looked surprised but didn't object. The defense lawyer, a wiry man in a wrinkled suit named Leon Keller, scoffed but stayed quiet. Blythe nodded. Proceed. Lila climbed back up onto the witness seat. This time Bruno followed and sat at her feet. She took a breath, looked at the floor, then up at the judge, then, finally, at Bradley. He wanted to take me, she said, clear as day. He said I was supposed to go with him. Mama said not to open the door, but he got in. He took her away. Gasps echoed around the room. Catherine stood slowly. Just to be clear, Lila, is the man you saw that day? She pointed to Bradley Hale. The man sitting at that table. Lila didn't hesitate this time. Yes. Bruno gave a low, short bark. Everyone froze. And then, applause. It started from the back of the courtroom, soft, unsure, but quickly others joined. Not raucous, not overwhelming. Just a wave of something human, something grateful. The judge raised a hand and silenced the room. Thank you, but let's maintain decorum. He turned to the bailiff. Note the emotional support animal's role as appropriate and commendable. Let it be included in the transcript. Later that day, Jasmine also testified. Her voice was steady, eyes sharp. She identified Bradley without hesitation, recounted the days locked in that trailer, the false promises, the terror. Her account, combined with Lila's, painted a story that the jury had no trouble believing. By the end of the hearing, Judge Blythe ordered Bradley Hale held without bail, pending full trial in state court. Charges: attempted abduction, unlawful imprisonment, child endangerment, and conspiracy. Outside the courthouse, the snow had begun to fall again, thin flakes drifting sideways like ash. Eli, Lila, and Bruno stood beneath the gray sky. For the first time in days, Lila smiled. He barked at just the right time, she whispered. Eli looked down at Bruno. He always does. The frost had softened its grip on the town of Frostford. A hesitant spring pushed through the edges of winter like a forgotten memory returning. Snow still lined the forest paths, but it no longer howled with the bite of death. Instead, the air carried whispers of something else, healing perhaps, or at least the shape of it. At the edge of the woods, the old cabin no longer looked abandoned. Smoke curled from its stone chimney, and the wooden steps had been sanded smooth and re-stained. Fresh curtains framed the windows, and just outside the front door, a small wooden sign now hung, Lila and Bruno's Den. Inside, the warmth smelled of pine and cinnamon. A hand-knit rug lay beneath the couch, and a new bookshelf hugged the wall. And above the mantelpiece, mounted on 2 brass hooks, was the faded green bag. Cleaned and preserved, no longer hidden, no longer clutched in fear. It hung there like a flag, silent and soft, but powerful. Lila sat cross-legged by the fireplace, humming softly as she arranged plastic farm animals into a crooked line. She wore a red sweater 2 sizes too big, her hair tied into 2 braids with mismatched ribbons. Her cheeks glowed with a soft pink. Health and safety had returned to her face. Bruno, now slightly heavier with contentment, lay stretched beside her. The 5-year-old German shepherd had taken to following her like a shadow. His coat had been brushed until it gleamed, and his movements, once tense with training, now softened when Lila rested her head against his back. They were never more than 5 feet apart. Eli sat at the old wooden table by the window. The sun filtered through, casting golden slants across his open notebook. He held a fountain pen, black ink, fine nib, and for the first time in years, he wrote not out of necessity, but of choice. His handwriting, a steady mix of capital letters and long loops, scrawled across the page. March 12th. 1 month since the trial, 1 month since she called this place home. Lila speaks more now. She calls me Eli, not sir. I don't correct her. I don't want to. Sometimes, when she's half asleep, she whispers for her mom. I don't interrupt those moments. Bruno just curls closer to her. They've found each other, and somehow, that's enough for both of us. The page trembled slightly beneath his fingers. He exhaled slowly and kept writing. Last night, I had the dream again. Fallujah, 2007. But this time, I woke up to a little girl's footsteps across the wooden floor, not screams. She said she couldn't sleep and asked if I could tell her about the stars, so I told her. I made some of it up. She didn't care. He looked up then, his eyes finding Lila and Bruno by the fire. Outside, the mail truck rumbled up the distant path, its wheels crunching leftover snow. Eli rose and opened the cabin door, waving to the driver, Tim Boyd, a gruff man in his late 40s with windburned cheeks and a beard that always looked a week behind schedule. Got something from Westbridge, Tim said, handing over a single brown envelope. From a Miss June Lake. Ring a bell? Eli nodded slowly. It does now. Inside, Eli sat down again, careful as he opened the letter. The handwriting was elegant but shaky, like memory being reborn. Dear Mr. Eli Ward, I saw the trial on the news. I saw the little girl, Lila. That bag she held, it was mine once. Or rather, it was my daughter Hannah's. 3 years ago, my daughter disappeared with her infant. She was fleeing a man who claimed to be a child protection officer. We never found her, never found the baby. But I recognize that bag. I sewed the patch inside myself. You may be the only one who's seen the pieces of this story. I don't know if Lila is my granddaughter, but if you believe she might be, I'd like to know her. I'd like to know you. With deepest thanks, June Lake. Eli reread the letter 3 times. The fire popped in the hearth behind him. He looked up, eyes narrowing with focus. He stood, walked over to the fireplace, and gently touched the green bag above the mantel. Then he turned to Lila. Lila, he said, crouching beside her, do you remember your mom's name? She paused mid-play, her fingers tightening on a plastic goat. Then she whispered, Hannah. Eli didn't smile, not yet. Would you like to hear from someone who knew her? Lila looked up. Her eyes, wide, uncertain, searched his. Then she nodded once. That night, after Lila had fallen asleep with Bruno curled against her feet, Eli returned to his notebook. He began a new page. I've found the light in this cabin again, not through war stories or medals, through bedtime books and snow angels, through a green bag and a little girl who won't let go of hope. The snow in Frostford didn't melt all at once. It retreated gently, like a secret slowly unveiled. First, the icicles hanging from roof edges began to drip. Then the paths that once crunched under heavy boots turned soft and muddy. By mid-March, the forest whispered of change. The cabin no longer looked like a shelter against the storm. It looked like home. The town square of Frostford, normally quiet and modest, had been transformed for the annual spring honor gathering. The banner fluttered between 2 flagpoles, in celebration of renewal, courage, and community. Below it, a makeshift stage had been set up, with folding chairs arranged in crooked lines and paper snowflakes strung across the front, like a tribute to the winter they were leaving behind. Eli stood near the edge of the crowd, hands tucked into the pockets of a dark flannel coat. His shoulders remained squared but not stiff. He wore no uniform, no medals. Only the etched lines of time and loss on his face hinted at the weight he carried. Beside him sat Bruno, now wearing a new leather collar with a brass tag engraved simply, Bruno, guardian of Lila. Lila was already seated near the front, her legs swinging above the ground. She wore a sky-blue dress with white mittens and a knit scarf shaped like a fox. Her braids had been redone neatly by Miss Hartley, her new preschool teacher, and she clutched a red ribbon tied in a small loop in her gloved hands. The mayor, Mason Reeve, a stout man with silver hair, stepped to the podium. Mason had the round, genial face of someone who rarely said no to second helpings or charity events. His voice, once booming, had taken on a more reverent tone over the past few years, especially after the town had witnessed tragedy and survival in such intimate ways. Today we honor the beginning of spring, and with it, the resilience of this town, Mason began. And we especially recognize one man who reminded us what bravery, kindness, and quiet strength can look like. He turned toward Eli, gesturing for him to step up. Eli shook his head gently. "No," he mouthed, barely audible. He took a small step back. Bruno, sensing the tension, looked up at him, then at the crowd. But Lila stood. She walked, slowly but surely, up the steps to the stage. The crowd hushed, watching the girl they had only known as the snow survivor. She didn't flinch, didn't search for words. She simply looked out over the people, then down at Bruno, and raised her voice enough to be heard. "Heroes don't always talk," she said. "They don't always get medals, but they're always there, like he was for me." She stepped down, walked toward Bruno, and gently tied the red ribbon around his collar. "This is for you," she whispered. "You never let go." A woman in the audience, Carla Dunn, the town librarian, in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and thick glasses, clapped first. Then a man in a wheelchair followed, and within seconds, the whole crowd stood and applauded. Not for Eli, not for Lila alone, but for the bond between girl and dog, between survival and hope. Eli didn't cry, but he turned his face slightly away and ran his fingers once through Bruno's thick fur. That night, the cabin glowed. The fireplace crackled softly, the scent of stew lingering in the air. Lila sat at the table coloring, while Bruno napped by the doorway, tail thudding every time she laughed. Eli poured himself a cup of tea and stood by the window. In the distance, the stars shimmered faintly and the last remnants of ice blinked under moonlight. He picked up the notebook again, a new page, March 21st. The snow has melted. Not just outside, inside too. Today a little girl taught me what courage looks like when it wears mittens and speaks with a stutter. She gave a dog a ribbon and gave a town its breath back. He paused, then added, "They're calling the new program Warm Paw, Cold Nights." Bruno's face is on the poster. That damn dog might be more famous than me. Good. The door knocked gently. Eli opened it to find Nadine Rivera, a community counselor who had recently moved from Fairbanks. Nadine was in her late 30s, tall and slender with warm amber eyes and a cascade of dark curls pulled into a loose braid. She carried a small tote bag full of donated books and supplies. "I brought some books for Lila," she said with a soft smile, "and I just wanted to thank you. The shelter we're setting up, your story is helping more families than you know." Eli stepped aside to let her in. "It wasn't just me." She knelt to scratch Bruno's ears. "I know, he's quite the legend already." In the weeks that followed, the program expanded. A small wing of the community center was turned into a night shelter. They named it the Lake Wing in honor of Hannah Lake, whose name had once been almost forgotten. Lila visited often, sitting with other children and reading picture books with Bruno curled at her side. And so it went. 4 souls, once scattered in darkness, had found each other. A soldier who thought he had no more battles worth fighting. A dog, bred for war but reborn for love. A girl who spoke little but gave everything with her eyes. And light, fragile but real, had returned to the place the snow once claimed. Some people say miracles don't happen anymore, but sometimes a miracle is just a little girl in the snow. Sometimes it's a soldier who stopped when everyone else kept driving. And sometimes it's a dog who refused to look away. God doesn't always thunder from the skies. Sometimes he whispers through the wind or sends a paw, a ribbon, a stranger. And in the darkest winter, he still makes the snow melt. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment with a prayer or message of strength. And may God bless you and everyone watching this, with peace, with courage, and with the kind of love that never lets go. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories where faith meets fur, and where even the smallest act of kindness becomes a light in the snow.